An American forward observer spoke 12 words into his radio. 3 minutes later, a German headquarters ceased to exist. The general who walked out of that wreckage spent years trying to name what had hit him. Then the British locked him inside a country mansion wired with hidden microphones. He answered without knowing anyone was listening. His name was Fritz Bayerlein. What he said in that room is why German generals all sounded the same about American artillery. July 25, 1944, Normandy. Bayerlein heard the engines first, a low drone, distant, then closer, then a conveyor belt of aircraft, one formation replacing the next before the horizon cleared. He stepped out of his command post and understood. Understanding changed nothing. Bombs fell in carpets, back and forth across Panzerlehr. The earth convulsed, tanks overturned. Men who had lived through the Eastern Front climbed out of foxholes and ran in circles until splinters cut them down. When the noise broke, Bayerlein walked into what was left of his division. Craters where positions had been, guns buried, vehicles burning, men sitting in the dirt, staring at nothing. At least 70% of my personnel were out of action, dead, wounded, crazed, or numb. Several of my men went mad and rushed around in the open until they were cut down by splinters. It was hell. Rommel's old chief of staff, commander of Panzerlehr, he called July 25th the worst day of his war. In that moonscape, he blamed the wrong weapon. The bombs had only opened the door. February 1943, Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. Rommel's forces shattered an American line in days. Units broke, officers lost the map, tanks burned beside abandoned trucks, prisoners drifted back without leaders. Bayerlein watched young Americans fall back across open ground and filed them away. Green, loud, unfinished. Germany, he believed, had already measured this army. 18 months later, that measurement killed his men. Bayerlein's veterans knew artillery, British batteries, Soviet massed guns, a ranging shot, an adjustment, a window to move. The first time American fire found one of his positions, the window never opened. No ranging shot, no adjustment, silence. Then every shell arrived in the same second, from different bearings, as if the ground had agreed on a single verdict. Bayerlein reached the position after. A sergeant with 3 years in Russia sat against a tree and could not speak. The men around him were the same, unwounded, alive, absent. Bayerlein blamed bombs, exhaustion, the weight of weeks. Then it happened again, then again, on a road column, on a gun line, on a headquarters that had moved during the night and still lit up at dawn. The Americans had a name for it, time on target. Bayerlein was about to learn the part worse than the shells. One afternoon in Normandy, a forward position reported American infantry probing the tree line. They watched, they held. Then one soldier heard it. Not tracks, not boots. A faint crackle of static. A voice cut short. Silence. Nobody moved. A sergeant met the eyes of the man beside him. Still nothing. A few men let their shoulders drop. Reconnaissance, they told themselves. Guns this far back took longer. Everyone knew that. Someone recognized the sound. American walkie-talkie. The sergeant shouted. Men grabbed rifles. A field telephone went over as a soldier lunged for cover. One man stayed put, frozen on the lip of the trench. 3 minutes. Nothing. Then the first shell, then all of them. The line had stayed frozen and still drew the full shoot. A forward observer had read a grid, spoken into a handset, and walked on. The guns sat miles away. The observer was already gone. The shells found the hole anyway. One lieutenant with a radio borrowed the weight of a colonel's guns. Batteries answered together. When the dumps ran low, fresh shells showed up with the morning. From Normandy to Belgium, the death report read the same. Not the Sherman, not the B-17, the walkie-talkie. By the time you heard the crackle, the guns had already fired. Flight time was the only thing left. Bayerlein tried to fight it the German way. Night marches, radio silence, deeper holes, assembly areas pushed into orchards and farm walls, counterattacks timed for weather that blinded observers. For a few hours it worked. Then an American FO crawled into a ditch with a map case and a handset. 3 minutes later, the orchard became steel, timber, and bodies. At Dom-Bugenbach in the Ardennes, American guns fired more than 10,000 rounds in a day to break one armored assault. Bayerlein heard the same arithmetic in his own sector. American dumps refilled by morning while German batteries counted every round and waited on trucks that sometimes never came. By winter 1944, he pushed a rebuilt division through frozen roads toward Bastogne. The offensive needed cloud. Fog was armor. When the sky tore open, the observers were already on the net. His men stopped flinching at impacts. Impacts became weather. What emptied Eastern Front veterans was the quiet before it broke, the half-second when someone nearby might have heard static. If that sound was real, the rest of the day had already been decided. German artillery could kill. German gunners could shoot. What they could not match was the chain that began with a man at a hedgerow and ended minutes later with every tube in range firing as one instrument. Fire direction centers did the math in real time. Radios stayed alive. Trucks kept rolling from beach to battery after a German quartermaster would have called the day impossible. Outside Bastogne, Bayerlein ordered a panzer company into a wood line before first light. Engines hooded, tracks wrapped, no radio until the jump-off. At 4:10, the company sat invisible under the trees. At 4:14, the treetops came apart. Someone on the American side had marked the wood, spoken a grid, and gone still. Bayerlein's tanks never fired. The landscape spent steel until the wood line quit answering. After the war, the British took captured generals to Trent Park, a country house north of London. Wine at dinner, a billiard table, a library. 59 of them spoke as if the walls were empty. Microphones sat in the walls, the ceilings, the fireplaces, inside the garden benches, inside the billiard table itself. Every word typed, every slip saved. Decades later, the transcripts opened. Through hundreds of separate conversations, one subject kept walking back into the room. Different armies, different fronts, different men, same weapon, artillery. Bayerlein was one voice in the stack. Other generals arrived carrying the same shape of sentence, a system that marked you before you could answer. One radio call, dozens of tubes, one impact time, shells replaced by morning. One of them said the Reich had built no reply that mattered. Skill slid off it. Courage slid off it. The perfect reverse slope position slid off it. They argued about bombers. They argued about fighters. They argued about American infantry. On the guns, the room narrowed. The shells landed before any of that mattered. April 1945. The Ruhr pocket closed. Bayerlein went into the bag. Post-war American historians walked him through the whole war. Then they set July 25th, 1944 on the table. He had walked some of the century's worst ground. He still pointed at that morning outside St. Lo. It wasn't louder than Stalingrad. That missed the point. That morning was a demonstration. 12 words into a radio, 3 minutes, then silence where a headquarters had been. Other German generals heard that crackle. Bayerlein was the one who said out loud what it meant. In the mansion with the hidden microphones, in the interviews after surrender, the verdict kept repeating. American artillery was not merely heavy, it was awake. The crackle of a walkie-talkie. 3 minutes later, the shells.